We all know that the NBA can change just like that. Every single offseason, every single trade deadline, there's another guy that's unhappy. There's another star that's available for trade. There's another team that's tearing things down, trading guys away. If someone had told you a year ago that Mikal Bridges was going to get traded to the Knicks for the equivalent of like 5 or 6 first-round picks, you would have thought that they were crazy. If someone would have told you a year ago that Paul George was going to leave the Clippers for absolutely nothing and go play with the Sixers of all teams, you wouldn't have believed them. Stuff happens every single year that is completely out of nowhere, and so I wanted to take a chance to think about a year from right now, what are some crazy things that could actually happen in the NBA? And for me, the number one draft pick of that list, the guy that needs to be discussed, is Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler is a 2025 free agent, by the way. He has 1 year left on his deal with the Heat, and then he has a player option for next season at like over $50 million, but he's gonna have suitors in free agency, and he was actively looking for a contract extension from the Miami Heat this offseason. There were public comments made by Pat Riley about the fact that Jimmy didn't play enough. Jimmy needs to get out there. Jimmy Butler said his own things publicly that were kind of weird as well, and ultimately they just kind of agreed to not really worry about it at the moment, which to me is not necessarily a recipe for Jimmy Butler being a member of the Miami Heat a year from now, not to mention the fact that this team might not be very good. They're always going to be a team that you're going to be afraid to play in the postseason if they're healthy. But from a roster perspective, when you look at the other top teams in the Eastern Conference, Miami's not close to those teams. Not only are they not close, the rest of the roster doesn't really align with giving Jimmy Butler a new contract. Like, imagine Miami goes, let's say they win 45 games and they lose in the second round of the postseason. Are the Heat fans, is the Heat front office really going to look at that situation, look at the roster that they have and say, you know what sounds great? Let's give Jimmy Butler another 3-4 year deal, paying him a ton of money as he continues to get older, and you never know if the guy's going to be healthy or not. And it's hard, right? Because they've had a ton of success with this guy there. I mean, they were one of the most successful teams in the Eastern Conference over the past couple of seasons, especially in the postseason. But at a certain point, a decision has to be made on this guy. And that point kind of has already passed. It was this past offseason. He wanted an extension. Miami didn't want to give him one. It's always possible that they have a great year. They figure out a new contract and he ends up staying in Miami, retires in Miami. But this feels a lot like the Paul George situation with the Clippers, where there's just frustration on each side. One side is, upset about the fact that the guy isn't playing enough and he's injured and he's missing games. The other side is like, hey, give me my money. I'm an all-NBA caliber player still. I should be getting the money. Don't worry about the years. Just give me what I'm supposed to be paid. Give me my max. And just like Paul George, he's essentially going into a contract year. Now, maybe that means that Jimmy Butler's going to have a great year because he's going into a contract year. He's going to play 75 games. Like Paul George actually played the most games he's played in years this year as he was going into a contract year. And maybe everything will be fine. But I can guarantee you there are front offices around the league that are looking at 2025 free agency as an opportunity to add a missing piece to their roster. And Jimmy Butler could be that guy as a 2025 free agent. So that's the top guy. If I had to pick one player that I think is going to be on a different team a year from now, I think Jimmy Butler's near the top of the list. But that's not the only guy. Karl Anthony-Towns is someone that has to be discussed within this conversation. It might seem strange considering how successful Minnesota was last year. They make the conference finals. Cat was pretty decent at times during the postseason. He shot the ball really well, actually guarded decently well as well. And it's clear that they have something working there with Ant as the backcourt guy and then Cat and Rudy Gobert in the front court. But here's the issue for Minnesota. When you look at the financial structure of this team, when you look at the cap sheet, this is an unbelievably expensive roster for a team that might not actually have a finals trip in them over the next couple of seasons. Like, there's a scenario because of how loaded the Western Conference is this year. The Minnesota wins like one playoff series, and then they're looking at this expensive of a roster. And had they not had the postseason success that they had this year, we might have been having this conversation this offseason, but that kind of got pushed down the road a little bit because they were really good and they, actually had a legitimate chance to make the finals. They just lost to the Mavs in the conference finals. If they have a bad year this year, one of these guys is probably gone. You're not going to get great value out of Gobert. McDaniels is someone you'd like to keep. Obviously, Ant's not getting traded unless he asks to get traded. The odd man out here in terms of value they could get in return, in terms of a guy that they could actually replace, has always been Karl Anthony-Towns. There have long been rumors about the Knicks being a possible destination for Karl Anthony-Towns because of his connections there. There is a structure there that makes at least a little bit of sense with Julius Randle, maybe some picks, whatever the case may be. It's a difficult situation for Minnesota because they still want to be a good team. It's not like they want to go backwards, but in terms of a cost-saving move, Cat is the guy on the chopping block in Minnesota. That has been made clear. Not to mention the fact that they got to figure out the ownership situation. They've got one owner in Glenn Taylor that is like, hey, just kidding, I'm not going to sell the team anymore because the A-Rod ownership group didn't come up with the money. The A-Rod ownership group is like, nah, just kidding, we want to buy the team, we have the money now. They don't know who the owner is going to be a year from now. They don't know who's going to be writing the checks for this incredibly expensive team, and because of how good the West is, they might not win more than one postseason series next year, which would set off a chain of events that could absolutely result in Karl Anthony-Towns on a different team a year from now. Next up is one of my favorite ones to talk about, and that is LaMelo Ball in Charlotte, because it's felt like since he got drafted, he's been pretty safe as like a franchise cornerstone piece for the Hornets moving forward, mostly just by default. They haven't had a ton of young talent. They drafted guys that ended up not working out, and LaMelo has been, when he's clearly, at his peak, all-star, maybe even all-NBA caliber player, and has that ceiling still as a guy with great size, great vision, shoots a lot of threes. There's a lot of good stuff to like there with LaMelo. The problem is, he hasn't really been on the floor the last couple of seasons, and he's on this giant contract, and Charlotte now kind of has a replacement for LaMelo. You could make the argument right now, pretty good one, that Brandon Miller is the piece that you would rather have long-term in Charlotte. I think those two guys work really well together. I'm excited to see them play together this year. I think Charlotte might actually be better than a lot of people expect this year, but it's not a difficult argument to make that the move in a year from now is to trade away LaMelo, to build around Brandon Miller, to get that contract off the books, to get some kind of assets in exchange for LaMelo. And I think there would be teams out there that would be willing to trade for him. It reminds me a little bit of where someone like Zion Williamson's value is, where although the peak of Zion has been higher, he's been, legitimately an all-NBA caliber player in the very few small sample sizes that we've gotten of him actually healthy. But you never know if he's going to be healthy, if he's going to be happy where he is. Those two guys to me are on a similar level of value in terms of what you could get in a trade compared to the value of the actual team that they're on, because they're just never on the floor enough. If you told me a year from now, LaMelo got traded to the Nets or the Magic or any of these other teams, I would not be surprised at all. I think Brandon Miller had that good of a rookie season, and ideally, Charlotte builds around those two guys. They get some more talent in there, and then maybe they're good in a couple of seasons because of the strength of that backcourt, but it's not a guarantee to me, given the contract, given the injury issues, that LaMelo is like the franchise cornerstone piece that we all thought he was going to be when he got drafted. I didn't necessarily save the best for last, but near the top of the list for last, Kevin Durant and just the Phoenix Suns in general. I've done a whole video about this already, about what their team could look like a year from now. Feels a little bit more like a 2-year plan, because Matt Espy has come out and said, hey, we're going to be in a second apron for 2 more years. After that, we'll figure it out, which ironically coincides exactly with Kevin Durant's contract situation as well, 2 years from now. And it's kind of like Minnesota. There's a real possibility that whatever success Phoenix envisions, given the expense of the roster, given the talent, or at least the star talent of the roster, Phoenix has in mind, okay, this is what the season should look like. There's a real scenario in which they don't even get close to that. They could win 45 games, win one postseason series, maybe not even win a postseason series, just like they did this year. They didn't even win a game in the postseason. And then they're all looking around like, what exactly are we doing here? We spent all this money, giving up all these assets to not even advance in the postseason. And Kevin Durant's probably looking around too, like, I've only got a few more years left in me, certainly at this level of play. Why do I want to stick around on a sinking ship in Phoenix? It's never stopped him before from asking out of situations that he doesn't think are conducive to winning a title. This Phoenix situation, all the way through the year, at the trade deadline, if they're not record-wise where they think they should be after the playoffs in the offseason, this is a team to keep an eye on constantly for roster changes. It's not just Kevin Durant. Devin Booker could say, hey, I'm out of here. I don't want to be here. You guys have given away the entire future and we're not winning enough. I liked those other teams before KD got here. They could try and get something out of Bradley Beal, I guess. This is as all-in of a team as we have ever seen. And they're a team that did not succeed at all in the postseason last year, and it's realistic to expect that could happen again and result in, a year from now, a completely different look for this Phoenix roster. And all the stuff I just mentioned, it might seem way out there, it might seem crazy, but that's the thing that makes the NBA great. The crazy stuff actually becomes a reality like 50% of the time. So a year from now, half this list could turn out to be true.